Deep beneath the mud and blood of World War I's Western Front, something ancient was stirring. In a French military bunker, as artillery thundered overhead and soldiers huddled in their trenches, workers' shovels struck stone that shouldn't have been there. Roman stone. And with that discovery, a horror was awakened that would make the war above seem merciful by comparison. The story you're about to hear isn't just about war, though shells and gunfire frame its beginning. It's not just about friendship, though a tragic betrayal sits at its core. This is a tale of what happens when modern warfare collides with ancient evil, when human cruelty meets something darker still, and when guilt drives a man to descend into a nightmare to save his best friend, only to find something else entirely waiting in the dark. Amnesia the Bunker begins simply enough. A French soldier named Henri Clément, waking up in an infirmary with no memory of recent events. But why is the bunker abandoned? Why have the officers fled, sealing their own men inside? And what is that sound echoing through the walls that seems to know who Henri is? In the darkness of the corridors, something stalks. Something that was once human. Something that remembers Henri. The year is 1916, and the Western Front has ground to a bloody stalemate. The Battle of Verdun rages to the south, where hundreds of thousands have already died. The Somme offensive looms on the horizon, promising even greater carnage. But in this lonely French bunker, a different kind of horror is about to unfold. One that will make the war above seem almost merciful by comparison. To understand this story, of friendship turned monstrous, of ancient cults and cosmic horror, wearing the skin of a World War I thriller, we need to go back. Back to when the first pickaxe struck ancient stone, when the first soldier reported hearing whispers in the dark, and when a simple game of choice between two friends set in motion events that would transform a bunker into a tomb. This is a story about guilt, about redemption, and about the horrors that lurk not just in ancient darkness, but in the human heart itself. But before we descend into the darkness, a quick word. If you enjoy deep dives into gaming's most fascinating stories, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. You can also follow me on Twitter for behind-the-scenes look at how these videos come together. And if you'd like to help shape future topics and get your name in the credits, either check out my Patreon or join the channel, where members get to vote on upcoming videos and get their name featured in the credits. Your support helps make these deep dives possible, and I couldn't do it without this amazing community. Now, let's begin our descent. It began with an order that seemed routine enough. In early April 1916, the French High Command instructed the bunker's garrison to dig deeper. The reasoning was partly practical. They needed more storage space, more room for troops. But there was also propaganda value. A massive underground fortress would serve as a symbol of France's determination and engineering prowess. As Sergeant Joubert reported to his superiors on May 2nd, the excavation would put them in position to launch a massive push from inside the tunnels by September. But on April 2nd, as the soldiers dug beneath their bunkers, they discovered something unexpected. Ancient Roman tunnels stretching towards the German lines. The officers saw immediate tactical potential. If these tunnels extended far enough, they could be used to launch a surprise attack behind enemy lines. Among the soldiers tasked with excavation was Alex Neuer, an amateur classicist who took particular interest in the Latin inscriptions they uncovered. Neuer was initially excited. Finding intact Roman artifacts was a rare opportunity, but his enthusiasm would soon turn to dread. What Neuer found in those ancient texts would change everything. These weren't ordinary Roman military tunnels. The inscriptions spoke of crossing into darkness and beyond, of rituals performed by a cult that believed they'd found the key to immortality. They described an other world dominated by darkness, filled with monsters and tormented souls. The tunnels, it seemed, had been used as a portal to this pagan hell. More disturbing still, the text described blood-soaked rituals performed in a great arena built over an endless pit. Rituals that promised immortality through suffering. By early May, the supernatural presence in the tunnels began making itself known. On May 5th, two soldiers, Toussaint Buffoy and Johannes Nicolai, heard inhuman howls echoing from the depths. While Nicolai retreated in terror, Buffoy ventured deeper. What he witnessed that night would shatter his sanity. In his journal, he wrote of experiencing a vision of a gone world. Bloody and terrible, beautiful and awful, godly and infernal. The experience changed him profoundly. The nightmares began spreading through the garrison like a contagion. Soldiers reported vivid dreams of ancient rituals, of consuming a strange liquid that filled them with a lust for all things carnal. Some, like Beaufoy, found themselves craving these visions even as they destroyed their minds. On May 14th, soldier Gaspard Leroux had an encounter in the tunnels that left him blabbering about otherworldly horrors. When Neuer's translations confirmed details of Leroux's experience, panic began to spread. The officer's response was swift and brutal. Major Sergeant Delpy and Sergeant Reynard implemented harsh punishments for anyone spreading superstitious nonsense. Neuer was imprisoned for 2 days after submitting a report about his translations, but their attempts at suppression only deepened the rift between officers and enlisted men. The soldiers, unable to speak openly about their experiences, suffered in terrified silence. Finally, on May 28th, a soldier known only as Faber decided to act. He gathered a group of trusted men, Beaufoy, Nicolai, Leroux, engineer Gazana Zabel, and Jean Renoir. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Use explosives to seal the tunnels and contain whatever evil lurked within. The sabotage was successful, but during the operation, Beaufoy separated from the group, cryptically telling them that he had other work to do, while pointing to his own eyes. The others assumed that he'd been killed in the blast. The officer's retribution was merciless. Through torture, they identified most of the conspirators. Delpy and Reynard subjected them to brutal interrogations, trying to extract the name of their leader. But none of them betrayed Faber, even as they faced execution. The captured men were eventually thrown into a pit to starve to death, a fate that would come to seem merciful compared to what awaited the rest of the garrison. By the end of June, the bunker had become a pressure cooker of fear, resentment, and madness. The officers ruled through terror, while the men whispered about scratching sounds in the walls and ghostly howls in the night. Unknown to all, Beaufoy had not died in the explosion. He had ventured deeper into the tunnels, where his deteriorating mind would lead him to grotesque acts of self-mutilation. And somewhere in the darkness, an ancient evil waited, ready to exploit the smallest crack in human nature. It was into this powder keg that fate would soon throw a simple game of chance between two friends, Henri Clément and Augustin Lambert. Their story would unleash a horror that would make even the ancient blood rituals seem tame by comparison. But to understand what happened next, we need to look at a fateful night in early July, when a rigged game of dice set in motion events that would transform the bunker into a tomb. The evening of July 8th started with a game of dice, a mundane moment that would spiral into nightmare. Sergeant Joubert had ordered that either Henri Clément or Augustin Lambert would need to perform a routine night patrol of the communication wires. The two friends, known throughout the garrison for their playful pranks and camaraderie, decided to let chance decide who would brave no man's land that night. But chance had nothing to do with it. Henri, perhaps seeking revenge for Lambert's past pranks, the urination in his flask, the lice in his bunk bed, the incidents with the barmaid, employed a sleight of hand trick, a simple deception between friends. Lambert, ever good-natured, accepted his loss with a smile. "Ah, fate's a bastard," he laughed, heading out into the darkness. "C'est la vie." Hours passed, then days. Lambert didn't return. In his journal, Henri recorded his growing anguish.
9th of July. I do not know the time, but dusk has fallen, and still, of course, no word. When I asked the sergeant, he shrugged, as if I was asking about when it might next rain. These fools around me, laughing, drinking, arguing. Do they know what I've done? Do they suspect it? I feel they must all be guilty of something. And yet, they laugh, drink, argue. God knows what I've done. I wonder if his judgment could be worse than my own.
The guilt began to consume him. What had started as a harmless prank had condemned his friend to death, or worse. The other soldiers had already written Lambert off as another casualty of war. But Henri couldn't live with himself. On the night of July 9th, he wrote his final entry.
My conscience compels me now, as it failed to compel me then. I must do something, even if it costs me my own life. I must do something lest I never sleep again. I must do something or risk greeting hell itself as a relief. I must do something.
Armed only with a revolver, Henri ventured into no man's land. Through pure luck or divine intervention, he spotted a distress flare burning in the distance. Following its light, he came upon something that shouldn't have existed. An impossibly deep crater, its walls unnaturally smooth, water pooling in its bottom. And there was Lambert, alive but barely, his leg injured from the fall. Henri climbed down into the crater, finding his friend delirious from thirst. In what seemed like mercy at the time, he gave Lambert water from the spring at the crater's bottom. Water with a strange sweet taste that would later prove catastrophic. Using a rope, Henri managed to pull both of them out, but their ordeal wasn't over. German soldiers spotted them, opening fire as Henri carried his wounded friend towards French lines. Then came the explosion, a German mortar strike that would change everything. Henri was knocked unconscious, suffering a traumatic head injury that would leave him in a coma with no memory of recent events. But Lambert, despite his previous injuries, found himself filled with impossible strength. He carried Henri back to the bunker's infirmary, an act that seemed miraculous at the time. Only later would the true horror of his recovery become apparent. The official patrol report, dated July 10th, noted the strangeness of the situation. Very odd that Lambert was neither injured from the fall nor the explosion, and that he ended up saving the man who came to save him. But battlefield luck is an odd thing. In every life, fate's winds blow erratic. But this wasn't luck, this wasn't fate, this was something else. Something that had waited in that cursed water for centuries, perhaps millennia. As Henri lay comatose in the infirmary, Lambert would begin a transformation that would turn a simple act of friendship into unimaginable horror. The bunker's nightmare was about to begin in earnest. At first, the changes seemed miraculous. Lambert, who should have been crippled from his fall, found himself growing stronger by the day. While Henri lay unconscious in the infirmary, his friend maintained a constant vigil, displaying a vitality that amazed even the medical staff. In his journal, Lambert wrote of feeling
11th of July 1916, dusk. I sit now at the bedside of my dear friend Henri Clément. The doctor has left, but I remain. I feel I must record the extraordinary twists of fate and fortune that have led me to be here. Breathing, alive, strong and well, while Henri lies unconscious, fighting for his life. It starts days ago, on a night patrol. I fell into some kind of pit. I was injured, unable to move, unable to escape. By all rights, it should have been my tomb. I cried for help, screamed myself hoarse. The effort left me parched, exhausted, and still alone. As the next night fell, as I cried what might have been my last cry for help, I could see the stars high above, beautiful and different. And then Clément's face appeared at the top of the pit. He lowered himself to me, found a trickle of spring water there, and had me drink from it. It was cool and crisp, with a strange, sweet taste. Never has water felt more nourishing than that. Administered by a dear friend's hand. I was saved. But of course, that is not the last twist fate's blade would stab into my back.
filled with new purpose, as if the ordeal had awakened something within him. But there was a darker side to his recovery. By July 12th, Lambert was consumed by thoughts of the crater, the strange-tasting water, and a toy rabbit he'd bought for his own son, now lost in that impossible pit.
12th July, 1916. Morning. Woke this morning and realized that a toy I purchased for my son is gone. I promised him I'd bring him something home from the front, so I brought him a stuffed rabbit from a local shop. A rabbit because he thinks he's so fast. It must have fallen from my pack when I fell into the crater. The thought of that stuffed rabbit lying in that crater, rain and weather matting its fur, unloved, forgotten, totally alone, lost forever. It fills me with profound hopelessness.
This fixation would prove to be the first crack in his sanity. The nights brought even stranger developments. Other soldiers began reporting scratching sounds in the walls, and Lambert's bunkmate, Tremblay, spoke of hearing inhuman howls echoing through the barracks. Lambert's own body was changing, his hands becoming gnarled, bulbous, as if they belonged to someone else, or something else. Then came the thoughts, seductive, bloody thoughts that called to him from the darkness.
13th July 1916. Morning. Everyone's talking about hearing scratching at the walls. Tremblay even claims to have heard howls echoing through the barracks. I feel strange myself. Can barely find the words to write. My hands feel so odd. Gnarled. Bulbous. Like they don't belong to me. I hesitate to write this, but a thought keeps echoing in my head. A thought I must not act on. A bloody thought so seductive. It calls. It calls. It calls.
As he wrote, his handwriting becoming increasingly erratic. He tried to resist these urges, but the water he'd drunk in the crater was working its ancient magic, transforming not just the body, but his very soul. On the night of July 14th, Lambert finally lost control. Sergeant Reynard, the sadistic officer who had tortured the tunnel saboteurs, became his first victim. The morning report was clinical. Multiple lacerations, chest cavity torn to shreds, every rib cracked, skull cracked open by repeated blunt force trauma. The officers launched an investigation, but they were looking for a monster among men. What stalked their corridors was no longer human. 2 days later, Lambert claimed his second victim, Faber, the mastermind behind the tunnel sabotage. In a cruel twist of fate, Faber managed to shoot the creature that had once been Lambert, driving it temporarily back into the walls. But 10 minutes later, it returned, dragging Faber into the darkness as he screamed for salvation. The other soldiers noted something disturbing. The beast seemed to recognize them, as if some fragment of Lambert's memory remained intact. The killing continued. On July 18th, Lambert's final journal entry consisted of 6 chilling words.
Blood on my hands. Blood on my hands.
That same day, he killed his former bunkmate, Tremblay, the transformation now complete. The officers responded by sending armed patrols to hunt the creature, but their bullets seemed to merely annoy it. What they didn't understand was that Lambert had become something ancient. A horror straight from the Mithraic text Neuer had translated, powered by the same dark forces that had once filled the Roman tunnels with screams. By July 20th, the situation had become untenable. The cowardly Commandant Fournier, along with Sergeant Joubert and the remaining officers, made their final betrayal. They fled the bunker, sealing the exit with explosives, condemning their own men to death at the hands of what had once been their brother in arms. As the last of the officers escaped, Joubert left behind a note promising to radio back the arsenal code. A final act of conscience that would later prove crucial to Henri's escape. But for now, the bunker had become a tomb, its corridors echoing with the sound of Lambert hunting down his former comrades, one by one. And all the while, Henri slept on in the infirmary, unaware that his act of mercy, giving his friend that sweet-tasting water, had transformed a simple soldier into something that would make even the horrors of war seem merciful by comparison. When he finally awoke on July 21st, he would find himself alone in a nightmare of his own inadvertent creation. Henri Clément opens his eyes to an infirmary bed, bandages wrapped around his head with no memory of how he got there. The silence is oppressive. No artillery fire, no soldiers' chatter, just the distant hum of electrical lights. Blood stains the sheets of nearby beds. Medical equipment lies scattered, as if the staff left in a hurry. On a nearby table, Henri finds his first clue. A medical report about his own condition, detailing a severe head trauma and subsequent coma. Venturing into the dimly lit corridor, Henri discovers a German-made wind-up flashlight. A vital tool that would become both salvation and risk. The mechanical whirring of cranking it echoes through the empty halls, a sound that will soon take on new meaning when Henri learns what else stalks these corridors. The officer's pantry provides the first hint that something is deeply wrong. There sits Soldat Bolstrand, propped against a crate, taking a final smoke despite his grievous wounds.
Thought I was the last one. We're trapped down here. A rat ran and blew the exit behind them. You want to escape. You need to blow it back open. There's dynamite in the arsenal. And a handle to trigger it somewhere in the excavation site. Get them, and you can make it out. Shit. That thing, it's coming for me. Here, take this. Finish me off, please. I want to die at the hands of a brother soldier, not that monster. There's ammo in the pantry. Get it. Do the job, please.
Boltrand explains that escape requires dynamite from the arsenal and a detonator handle from the excavation site. Then, hearing something in the walls, he hands Henri his revolver, begging for a mercy killing before that monster can reach him. But mercy isn't an option. As Henri moves to retrieve ammunition from the adjacent room, an inhuman form bursts through the wall behind Boltrand. In a flash of violence that sets the tone for what's to come, the beast drags the screaming soldier into darkness, leaving only bloody streaks across the floor. The encounter establishes a crucial truth. In this bunker, nowhere is truly safe. Following this brutal introduction, Henri discovers the bunker's beating heart, the generator room. Descending the metal stairs, the massive machine that powers the bunker's electrical system looms before him, its mechanical heartbeat a constant reminder of survival's price. The fuel gauge reveals a terrifying truth. The generator only runs for about 20 minutes on a full tank. Every expedition into the bunker's depths must be carefully planned around this cruel timer. This mechanical demon demands constant tribute, fuel that must be scavenged from the darkness it holds at bay. Each time the generator dies, the beast becomes more aggressive, more present. The lights don't just provide visibility, they're a psychological barrier between Henri and madness. Even worse, the generator's sputtering creates another tactical nightmare. When it runs low on fuel, the lights begin to flicker, creating strobing shadows that play tricks on Henri's already traumatized mind. The administration room initially appears to be a godsend. Its heavy metal doors can be barred from the inside, creating what seems to be the only true safe space in the bunker. The large storage chest allows Henri to cache vital supplies. Ammunition, fuel, cans, flares, and other tools of survival. A detailed map on the wall reveals the bunker's full layout, though many areas remain locked behind the emergency protocols. But even this sanctuary holds disturbing clues. Scattered across the desk are reports of increasing paranoia among the men, of strange sounds in the rules, of brutal officer reprisals against superstitious rumors. Most disturbing are the final orders signed by Commandant Fournier, authorizing the abandonment of the bunker and the sealing of its exits, condemning his own men to whatever horror stalked the halls. The relative safety of the administration rooms proves fleeting. As Henri's journey progresses, the beast begins to dig new tunnels, eventually breaching even this fortified space. The violation of this last safe area serves as a psychological turning point. Nowhere in the bunker is truly secure. The beast can appear anywhere, at any time, forcing Henri to constantly remain mobile despite the risk. Each element introduced in these early moments becomes increasingly crucial. The generator's demanding rhythm, the necessity of resource management, the psychological toll of darkness, and the gradual revelation of the tragedy that unfolded during Henri's coma. The scattered notes and journals begin to paint a picture of friendship corrupted, of ancient evil awakened, and of human cruelty that rivals any supernatural horror. To proceed deeper into the bunker, Henri must first deal with the emergency lockdown preventing access to crucial areas. But lifting this lockdown will only expose him to new horrors, new challenges, and new revelations about what happened to his friend Lambert. The real nightmare, it seems, is only beginning. With the administration room established as a temporary haven, Henri faces his first major obstacle: the emergency lockdown sealing off vital areas of the bunker. The control wheel meant to lift this lockdown crumbles in his hands, a symbolic breakdown of any hope for easy escape. But among the documents scattered in mission storage, Henri finds a note mentioning a spare wheel in Officer Delacier's locker, if only he can find the man's dog tags with its crucial code. The officer's quarters stand in stark contrast to the rest of the bunker, evidence of privilege preserved even in apocalypse. Fine wines still line the shelves, personnel quarters remain relatively untouched, and a strategic operation room speaks to the planning of battles from safe distances. But beneath this veneer of military order, signs of panic are evident. Chairs lie overturned, documents are scattered in haste, and bloodstains tell stories of the beast's visits. It's in the officer's private quarters that Henri finds his first substantial clues about Lambert's transformation. Journal entries speak of increasing paranoia, of strange sounds in the walls, and of men hearing familiar voices in the darkness. One officer writes of seeing something impossible, a soldier being dragged through solid stone, screaming in a voice he recognized. The search for Delisle's dog tags leads Henri through a maze of offices and personal quarters. The doors are locked, but the beast has created its own network of passages, holes torn through walls that Henri must brave to progress. Each hole represents a terrible choice: risk squeezing through the beast's domain or remain trapped in increasingly unsafe areas. A partially collapsed vent system offers an alternative route into Delisle's quarters, but clearing it creates noise that echoes through the bunker's halls. Every fallen piece of debris threatens to draw unwanted attention. When Henri finally reaches Delisle's room, he finds evidence of a hasty escape. Packed bags abandoned mid-flight, personnel letters half-burned in the fireplace, and finally, the precious dog tag itself. The code from Delisle's dog tags offer access to more than just his locker. It begins unlocking the bunker's darker secrets. Notes in his personal effects reveal the officer's growing awareness that something was hunting them, something that knew the bunker's layout intimately. More disturbing are the orders detailing acceptable losses among the enlisted men, treating their deaths as mere data points. With the replacement wheel in hand, Henri returns to the lockdown control. But lifting the lockdown isn't entirely about opening new areas. It's about releasing whatever remained contained. The wheels turning is accompanied by the shriek of rusted metal, and something else, a howl that echoes through newly accessible corridors. The beast, it seems, appreciates having more hunting grounds. The lockdown's end marks a point of no return. The administration room's relative safety is compromised, and the beast begins appearing more frequently, more aggressively. What began as a hunt for escape tools has become a descent into madness, where each new area promises both vital resources and new horrors. More than any physical danger, it's the psychological toll that begins to wear on Henri. Every step deeper into the bunker reveals more about what happened to Lambert, about the ancient evil that corrupted him, and about Henri's own unwitting role in unleashing this nightmare. The officers' quarters stands as testament to human failings, the betrayal of leadership, the abandonment of duty, and the terrible price of fear. The prison wing of the bunker presents an immediate cruel irony. Its thick metal bars and reinforced doors, designed to keep people in, now serve as the only barrier keeping something out. The air here carries the acrid scent of fear, tinged with this metallic scent of old blood. Each cell tells its own story of hasty abandonment, overturned meals, personnel letters never sent, and scratch marks on walls counting days that suddenly stop. But one cell remains occupied. Through the darkness comes a voice, speaking German. Karl Springer, prisoner 73014, bound to a chair with a bag over his head. His presence presents Henri with the first major moral choice of his journey. The bolt cutters needed to progress lie in Springer's cell, but retrieving them means either killing the prisoner himself or opening the cell and likely condemning Springer to a fate far worse than death. The prisoner's control room, housed in the warden's office, offers a perspective on power, both literal and metaphorical. The electrical switches that control the cell doors require generator power, creating a deadly puzzle of timing and resource management. Notes scattered across the warden's desk reveal the darker side of the bunker's authority. Detailed reports of enhanced interrogation techniques, approved by the same officers who would later abandon their men. Major Sergeant Delpy's reports paint a picture of the prison's final days. 20 German soldiers captured, most shipped to POW camps, but Springer kept behind for special attention due to suspicious rank insignias. The reports end abruptly with notes about strange sounds in the walls, about prisoners screaming, about something moving in the darkness. Accessing Springer's cell requires navigating a nerve-wracking sequence of events and problems. The control room can only be reached through a maintenance vent, requiring Henri to crawl through the beast's domain. The cell controls themselves create noise that echo through the prison's halls. Every action carries risk, every decision a potential death sentence. If Henri chooses to save Springer, his rescue becomes a frantic race against time. The beast, drawn by the noise of opening cells, arrives with terrible speed. The German soldier's gratitude comes in panic words that Henri can't understand, but the human connection is clear. A moment of mercy in a place that has forgotten such things. However, this mercy comes with a cost. Springer's screams, should Henri fail to protect him, will echo through the bunker's halls for hours afterward. The bolt cutters themselves tell a grim story, their handles stained with old blood, clearly used for more than their intended purpose. A journal entry reveals that they were Reynard's favourite interrogation tool before he became the beast's first victim. Now they'll serve as both tool and weapon in Henri's desperate bid for survival. But perhaps the prison's greatest horror lies in its familiarity. The careful records, the methodical cruelty, the bureaucracy of suffering. All of it painfully human. Before the beast, before the ancient evil from the tunnels, this place already knew how to break man. The monster's handiwork almost seems merciful in comparison to some of the sanctioned tortures detailed in the officer's reports. As Henri finally leaves the prison section, bolt cutters in hand, the weight of his choices hangs heavy. Whether Springer lives or dies, the prison serves as a stark reminder that monsters wore uniform long before Lambert's transformation. The beast may stalk these halls now, but the real horror began with stamps of approval on torture orders, with the casual cruelty of power unchecked. As the path opens up, we find ourselves in the soldiers' quarters. Where the officers' quarters spoke of privilege and power, the soldiers' quarters whisper of lives interrupted. Henri's footsteps echo through the barracks where he once slept, where he and Lambert shared jokes and played cards. Personal belongings still lie exactly where they were left. A letter home half written, a hand of cards never played, photographs of family who still wait for sons and husbands who will never return. The darkness here is different, more absolute. The electrical system, a daisy-chain network of switches, requires methodical activation. Each switch Henri throws cuts through the silence with a sound like a gunshot, followed by the agonizing wait to hear if something heard, if something is coming. The gradual illumination reveals the barracks in stages, each new pool of light uncovering fresh horrors. Under his bunk, Henri finds his own journal. The pages speak of pranks and friendship. Lambert has urinated in my flask again. Simple complaints that now carry the weight of tragedy. But it's Lambert's bunk that holds the darker truth. His final journal entries deteriorate from coherent thought to a single phrase repeated. Blood on my hands, blood on my hands, blood on my hands. Moving deeper into the quarters requires navigating collapsed corridors where rats feast on the fallen. Each new area presents the same cruel equation. Make noise to restore power, or risk stumbling blind through the beast's domain. The generator's distant hum becomes a lifeline, its rhythm marking the differences between safety and certain death. The mess hall stands frozen in a moment of terror. Chairs lie scattered, meals half-eaten, tables overturned as barricades. Here Faber made his last stand, believing he'd killed the beast with his revolver. A note nearby tells the rest. How it returned 10 minutes later, dragging him into the walls as he screamed for salvation. The floor still bears the scratch marks of his final moments. Through all of this, Henri must reach the communications room. Sergeant Joubert, in his final act of conscience, broadcasts the Arsenal code on an endless loop. But reaching the radio means activating every power switch in sequence, each click drawing the beast's attention closer. The growing electrical hum becomes a countdown to inevitable confrontation. Personal effects scattered through it tell the story of the garrison's descent into madness. Letters home become increasingly desperate. Dear Marie, I hear scratching in the walls again. The others hear it too now. My darling, something is hunting us, something that knows our names. Even more disturbing are the duty logs, showing how the beast chose its victims, targeting those Lambert had been closest to in life, as if completing some dark reunion with his former friends. The communication room itself becomes a desperate gamble. The radio equipment demands significant power, forcing Henri to keep the generator well fed. Joubert's voice crackles through static, breaking the bunker's terrible silence with the precious code. But each moment spent listening is another minute the beast draws closer, attracted by the electrical hum and radio static. As Henri finally pieces together the code, the full weight of the tragedy crystallizes. Every corner of these quarters holds memories of brotherhood, shared meals, card games, midnight conversations about homes and hopes. Now these same spaces have become a hunting ground where that brotherhood has been twisted into something monstrous. The beast doesn't just kill. It lingers in these familiar spaces, as if some part of Lambert still remembers where he was happiest, where he was most human. With the Arsenal code echoing in his mind, Henri faces the bunker's most fortified section. The arsenal was designed to keep people out, its heavy doors and reinforced walls meant to protect the military's most precious resources. Now, like everything else in this nightmare, its purposes has been twisted. These same defenses making it a maze where every wrong turn could mean death. The first layers are almost normal, if anything in this place can be called normal anymore. Military order still reigns in the main storage area, with neatly labelled crates of ammunition and carefully catalogued weapons. But even here, signs of the horror show through. Bullet holes pepper the walls, telling stories of desperate last stands. Blood trails lead to ventilation shafts, evidence of the beast's grim work. Using Jubert's code unlocks the deeper sections, but the arsenal holds its own cruel puzzle. Storage Area C has flooded, its contents submerged in black water that must be pumped out using generator power. Each mechanical whir of the pump echoes through the facility, a dinner bell for the beast. The water level drops agonizingly slow, while Henri strains to hear movement in the walls over the pump's steady drone. The maintenance section presents its own horrors. Here Henri discovers the chapel, transformed by the beast into something unspeakable. What was once a place of solace has become a nest, decorated with the twisted remains of the garrison. But it's the centerpiece that strikes deepest. Lambert's toy rabbit, the one he'd brought for his son, placed with almost ritualistic care among the carnage. Some fragment of Lambert remains, cherishing the last connection to his humanity. Beyond the chapel lies the pillbox, where Henri finds Foreman Stafford's corpse, a German sniper's bullet through his eyes. Even in death, Stafford clutches his logbooks, its pages detailing the Roman tunnel's excavation, and the gradual realization that they were unearthing something that should have remained buried. The final entries become increasingly paranoid, speaking of voices in the darkness and familiar faces glimpsed in impossible places. The dynamite, when Henri finally reaches it, feels almost insignificant compared to the revelations found along the way. Notes and journals piece together the full horror of Lambert's transformation, how the ancient water from the crater changed him, how his strength grew even as his humanity faded, how he began hunting his former friends with terrible purpose. But the arsenal's true horror lies in its reminders of normality. Requisition forms for the very dynamite Henri now carries still sit on the desks, waiting for signatures that will never come. Weapon maintenance logs back the daily routines of men that are now dead. Even the beast seems to respect the military order here, its tunnels and holes somehow more deliberate, almost tactical in their placement. As Henri finally retrieves the dynamite, the bunker's various horrors begin to merge. The military precision of the arsenal, the supernatural horror of the chapel, the human tragedy of the pillbox. All of it points towards something older, something that was waiting long before the first soldier set foot in these cursed tunnels. With the dynamite secured, only one task remains: retrieving the detonator handle from the Roman tunnels themselves. The entrance to the Roman tunnels marks a threshold between worlds. The military architecture of the bunker gives way to something older, something that remembers sacrifice made when Rome was young. The air itself changes, thick with a bluish fog that seems to consume Henri's lamplight. Here, for the first time, the beast is not the greatest threat. Something far older lurks in these ancient stones. Through the collapsed entrance, Henri finds the truth of Alex Neuer's translations. This was never a simple military tunnel. Columns rise into darkness, adorned with imagery that makes even hardened soldiers look away. The walls themselves seem to breathe, and in the fog, shadows move with terrible purpose. These aren't the beast's hunting grounds. Even Lambert's transformed horror seems to avoid these depths. But Henri isn't alone here. Through the mist comes a voice, singing a twisted poem about whirling darkness. Toussaint Boufoy, the soldier who first witnessed the tunnel's evil, has made this place his domain. His eyes are gone, gouged out by his own hands, but he moves with terrifying purpose, shotgun ready. In his madness, Boufoy has become something between prophet and predator, his verses mixing soldier songs of ancient chants. we will, the world, we will, it all gets lost in a terrible twirl. The ghostly figures that drift through the fog aren't simple hallucinations. They echo shapes seen in Neuer's translations, the ritual participants who sought immortality through darkness. Henri can choose to don his gas mask, blocking these visions but accepting near blindness and muffled hearing as the price. Finding the detonator handle means penetrating deeper into the tunnel's heart, where Roman architecture gives way to something older still. The fog thickens and the walls show signs of rituals that predate Rome's arrival. Here, the ancient cult conducted their darkest rites, seeking to cross between worlds through sacrifice and suffering. Their legacy lingers in the very stones, whispering promises of power to those who would listen. But it's behind the chamber holding the detonator that Henri finds the final piece of the puzzle. A narrow crawl space leading back to the crater where he found Lambert. Here lies the toy rabbit, lost when Lambert fell, now saturated with the same waters that transformed him. This simple object, meant as a gift for a child, becomes the key to understanding the full tragedy. The beast's obsession with the toy, the placement in the chapel nest, suddenly makes terrible sense. The tunnel offers one final revelation. The great arena mentioned in Neuer's translation isn't myth. It waits below, built over an endless pit. The ancient texts speak of immortality achieved through darkness, of sacrifices that opened doors between worlds. What changed Lambert wasn't just water. It was something older, something that had waited centuries for the right vessel. As Henri emerges from the tunnels, detonator handle in hand, the bunker's various horrors coalesce into a single truth. The beast isn't simply his transformed friend, but the latest vessel for an ancient evil. The war above, with all its modern horrors, merely provided cover for something that had waited since Rome's legions first marched across these lands. With dynamite and detonator in hand, Henri returns to the sealed bunker exit. The explosion that follows does not create the freedom that Henri desired. Instead, it reveals a pit descending into darkness. Following this new path, Henri enters something that shouldn't exist. An enormous area carved from living rock, suspended over an endless void. This is the place mentioned in Neuer's translations, where Roman cultists perform their blood rituals. Ancient bridges span the chasm, their wooden planks creaking with age. The beast arrives to the final confrontation, but the area's architecture offers terrible possibilities. The bridges can be manipulated, raised and lowered by ancient mechanisms that still function. Some are stone, eternal and immovable. Others are wooden, vulnerable to explosives or decay. Here, in this unholy place, Henri faces the ultimate choice regarding his transformed friend. The arena itself seems alive, responding to the confrontation. Otherworldly lights pulse in the void below. The shadows cast by pillars move against the light. Even the air feels charged with malevolent anticipation. This is more than a place, it's a crossing point between worlds, where reality wears thin and ancient horrors peer through the veil. In this nightmare amphitheater, Henri faces his final choice. If Henri chooses flight, it becomes a desperate dance of resource management and raw courage. 2 massive storage boxes, his only hope of climbing the arena's insurmountable walls, must be pushed into position. Each grinding shove across ancient stone echoes like artillery fire. The beast's response is immediate, terrible. It doesn't just hunt now, it seems to understand the finality of this chase. Time becomes a suffocating pressure. Every second spent positioning the boxes is a second exposed. The beast's attack grows more frenzied, more personal. It doesn't just lunge, it tries to circle, to cut off escape routes. Its claws rake inches from Henri's face as he scrambles over the first box. The second push becomes a nightmare of timing. Wait for the beast to charge past. Shove, retreat, wait again. The process is agonizing, made worse by the beast's almost human understanding of what Henri is attempting. The final climb is a symphony of terror. As Henri pulls himself up the makeshift stairs, the beast's claws catch his boot, nearly dragging him back. His fingers bleed on ancient stone as he hauls himself over the wall. The creature's howls transforming into something worse, a sound almost like pleading, like betrayal. One final effort sends him scrambling up to the exit stairs, the beast's cries echoing with horrible familiarity behind him. The alternative requires a different kind of courage. The will to end what Henri's mercy accidentally created. The rabbit toy, that simple gift meant for Lambert's son, becomes the key to both salvation and damnation. When Henri throws it onto the wooden bridge, the beast's reaction is immediate and heartbreaking. The creature doesn't just approach the toy, it cradles it almost tenderly, the same claws that have torn through so many former friends. In this moment of recovered humanity comes the chance for release. The bridge's supports, weakened by age and horror, will wait for Henri's action. A single shotgun blast, a well-placed grenade, even sustained gunfire. Any will send Lambert plummeting into the void. But the beast doesn't just fall. As the bridge collapses, time seems to slow. The toy tumbles from massive claws. The creature reaches not for salvation, but for that last connection to its lost humanity. The fall feels eternal, but it's the sound that will haunt Henri forever. The beast's roar transforming, becoming Lambert's voice, screaming his name. Not in anger or accusation, but in recognition, in final understanding. The void swallows both beast and cry, leaving Henri alone with the knowledge that he's both ended and released his friend. Both choices lead Henri to the same bitter end. Freedom comes through a narrow passage, a desperate crawl towards light that ends with a sickening tumble into a flooded ditch. Here, reality asserts itself with cruel efficiency. The mangled corpses of the fellow soldiers lie half-submerged around him, their faces frozen in recognition of their killer. If Henri chose escape, the beast emerges behind him, howling at the sun before vanishing into the wilderness. If he chose confrontation, falling rocks seal away an evil that has waited centuries to be found again. But war's machinery cares nothing for personal nightmares. German voices cut through the darkness. Schnell, schnell. Searchlights pierce the gloom like accusing fingers. The bitter truth reveals itself. There is no escape from horror, only different flavors of it. Whether Henri faces captured death or something worse hardly matters. The trenches above still run red, the artillery still thunders, and somewhere in the darkness, ancient things still wait to be found. In the end, the real horror isn't the beast or the cosmic evil that changed Lambert, or even the war itself. It's that it all began with an act of friendship, a drink of water offered to save a friend. Sometimes the darkest nightmares start with the simplest acts of mercy. And so ends the immediate story of Henri Clément, tumbling from ancient horror into the familiar violence of war. But to understand the true depth of Amnesia the Bunker's horror, we need to peel back its layers, like the rotting wallpaper of the bunker itself. For beneath its surface tale of supernatural transformation lies a more profound meditation on war, humanity, and guilt. The beast that stalked Henri through darkened corridors wasn't just a monster. It was a mirror, reflecting the horror of what men do to each other in the name of duty, order, and survival. The ancient evil awakened in those Roman tunnels found fertile ground in a place already well acquainted with systematic cruelty. And Henri's desperate journey to escape wasn't just about survival. It was about confronting the consequences of treating even a single human life as expendable. As we dive deeper into the game's themes, we'll see how every gameplay mechanic, every environmental detail, and every scrap of found narrative serves a greater purpose. The generator's demanding rhythm becomes a metaphor for the constant pressure of maintaining humanity in inhuman circumstances. The beast's hunting patterns reflect the way violence breeds violence. Even the simple mechanics of light and darkness speak to deeper truths about what we're willing to do or sacrifice when we think no one can see. Let us examine then not just what happened in that doomed bunker, but what it means about war, about friendship, about the fine line between monster and man. For in understanding these themes, we might better understand why this story of supernatural horror feels so devastatingly, unnervingly human. The true horror of Amnesia the Bunker lies not just in its supernatural elements, but in how it systematically portrays the erosion of humanity under the relentless pressure of war. The French military hierarchy becomes a carefully constructed microcosm of dehumanization, with each level of command treating those below them as increasingly expendable resources, rather than human beings. This dehumanization manifests in layers, each more disturbing than the last. The physical architecture of the bunker itself enforces this hierarchy. Officers' quarters with their fine wines, personal spaces, and comfortable furnishings stand in deliberate contrast to the cramped communal squalor of the soldiers' barracks. Even before the beast's appearance, the bunker's design reinforced who was considered more human than others. The officers' ultimate betrayal, sealing their own men inside with the beast, serves as the culmination of this process. But the documents scattered throughout the bunker reveals this wasn't a sudden decision born of panic. Rather, it was the logical endpoint of a mindset cultivated over months. Commandant Fournier's orders show an increasing willingness to treat soldiers as disposable assets. One particularly chilling document discusses acceptable wastage rates for patrol duties, calculating exactly how many men could be lost before efficiency would be impacted. The prison section provides the most explicit evidence of institutional dehumanization. Interrogation reports detail the torture of German prisoner Springer with clinical detachment. Major Sergeant Delpy's notes discuss enhanced interrogation techniques with the same bureaucratic precision he uses to requisition office supplies. The tools of torture, the bolt cutters, the restraints, the carefully positioned lights reveal how methodically cruelty has been systemized. Even the Roman tunnels excavation project demonstrates this pattern. Despite mounting casualties and clear signs of danger, the dig continued because command required it for strategic purposes. Engineers' reports of warning of unsafe conditions were dismissed. When soldiers began reporting supernatural phenomena, they were punished for spreading defeatist superstition, rather than having their concerns investigated. Lambert's transformation serves as both literal horror and dark metaphor for war's effects on soldiers. His change begins not with the supernatural order, but with the Order sending him into no man's land. An order stemming from Henri's rigged dice game. Treating his friend as expendable for personal convenience creates the circumstances for Lambert's physical transformation. The cursed warder merely accelerates and makes visible a process the war had already begun in his psyche. The evolution of Lambert's violence is telling. His first victim is Sergeant Reynard, one of the officers who most embodied the bunker's systematic cruelty. Subsequent attacks follow a pattern suggesting some part of Lambert remembered who had treated him and his fellow soldiers as less than human. Even in his monstrous form, his behavior reflects the dehumanizing hierarchy that helped create him. The game's most devastating commentary on dehumanization emerges in its final moments. Whether Henri destroys or escapes the beast, he emerges from the bunker's nightmare into an equally horrific reality. A ditch filled with rotting corpses, his fellow soldiers reduced to anonymous decay in mud and rain. The approaching German voices remind us that the machinery of war grinds on, indifferent to individual horror or revelation. If Henri chose to destroy the beast, the final roar that sounds like his name serves as a last reminder of Lambert's humanity. Lost not just to supernatural forces, but to the systematic dehumanization that made such a transformation possible in the first place. If he chose escape, watching the beast flee into the wilderness carries its own terror. The knowledge that somewhere out there, what remains of his friend continues to exist. Neither fully human nor fully monster. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is how quickly the supernatural horror of the bunker could be absorbed into the greater horror of the war. Reports would be filed, the beast victims would become more statistics, the bunker itself would be written off as a strategic loss. In the end, the true monster wasn't Lambert, or even the ancient evil that claimed him. It was a system that could take something as profound as a man's transformation into a monster, and reduce it to paperwork. The architecture of guilt in Amnesia the Bunker is as labyrinth as the facility itself, with every corridor leading back to questions of responsibility and the possibility or impossibility of redemption. At its heart lies Henri's original sin, a rigged game of dice, a simple act of deception between friends that spirals into apocalyptic consequences. Henri's journals trace the rapid evolution of his guilt. From initial smugness about his prank, to dawning horror at Lambert's absence, to the consuming need to make things right. I must do something, even if it costs me my own life. I must do something lest I never sleep again. I must do something or risk greeting hell itself as a relief. This progression suggests guilt isn't just an emotion. It's a transformative force in its own right. The amnesia that gives the game its title serves a deeper thematic purpose. Henri awakens with no memory of his guilt, but must piece it together through documents and environmental clues. This mechanical necessity becomes metaphorical. He must literally reconstruct his culpability, facing each revelation anew. The horror isn't just in remembering, but in having to accept responsibility all over again. Each major character carries their own burden of guilt. Sergeant Joubert's radio transmission of the Arsenal Code becomes his attempt at redemption for abandoning his men. Bufroy's self-mutilation can be read as penance for his role in the tunnel sabotage. Even the beast's behavior, particularly its fixation on the rabbit toy, suggests some vestige of Lambert feels guilt for what has become. The game's resource management mechanics serve as a metaphor for the weight of responsibility. Every bullet fired, every flare that is lit, every drop of fuel consumed carries moral weight, because these resources might be needed later to save someone else. The player must constantly weigh immediate survival against future possibilities for redemption, much as Henri must weigh his personal survival against his obligation to stop what he helped create. The prison section forces players to confront guilt directly through Springer, the German prisoner. His fate becomes a test of how far we'll go to survive, whether we'll add another sin to our burden or risk everything to maintain some moral core. That this choice comes with searching for torture implements formerly used on Springer adds layers of bitter irony to any attempt at mercy. Most complex is how the game handles the possibility of redemption. The two endings present different philosophical approaches. Destruction of the beast might offer cosmic redemption, but requires killing off what remains of Lambert, while escape preserves the possibility of Lambert's redemption, but releases a monster into the world. Neither choice offers clean absolution. Even the beast's behavior can be read through the lens of guilt and redemption. Its habit of arranging victims in the chapel suggests either attempt at grotesque penance or compulsive reenactment of his own transformation. The fact that Lambert's remaining humanity focuses on the toy he bought for his own son implies his greatest guilt might be abandoning his family role, not his murderous actions. The game's final moments offer no clean redemption. Whether Henri destroys or escapes the beast, he emerges into a ditch filled with corpses, a literal pit of consequences. The approaching German voices suggest that even if personal redemption was possible, the machinery of war grinds on, creating new guilt faster than any individual redemption could counter it. At first glance, the marriage of World War I horror with ancient Roman evil might seem incongruous. Yet Amnesia the Bunker weaves these elements together with terrible purpose, suggesting that modern warfare and ancient darkness aren't just compatible. They're fundamentally intertwined, each feeding and amplifying the other's capacity for horror. The Roman tunnels themselves serve as physical metaphor for this connection. Modern military engineering literally breaks through into ancient evil, but the notes and journals scattered throughout the bunker suggest that this was inevitable. The officers' cruel treatment of their men, the systematic dehumanization of prisoners, the calculation of acceptable casualties, all of it prepared the ground for older, darker forces to take root. Neuer's translation of the ancient texts create explicit parallels between Roman blood rituals and modern warfare. The cultists' belief in achieving immortality through violence mirrors the military's promise of glory through sacrifice. Their arena, built over an endless pit, finds its echo in the meat grinder tactics of World War I. Even the crossing places between worlds they sought have their modern equivalent in the spaces between humanity and barbarity that war creates. The game's treatment of technology emphasizes this theme. The generator, symbol of modern progress, proves ultimately inadequate against ancient darkness. Bullets can only temporarily drive back the beast. Even the bunker itself, testament to military engineering, becomes not a fortress, but a tomb. Modern innovations don't banish ancient horrors. They just provide new ways to encounter them. The beast embodies the fusion of ancient and modern horror the most. Created by prehistoric waters, but born from modern warfare's betrayals. It haunts through both the bunker's corridors and the ancient tunnels with equal facility. Its victims are arranged in poses that suggest both primitive ritual and modern military precision. Even its lair in the chapel represents the synthesis. Christian iconography defiled by arrangements that echo older, darker worship. Most disturbing is how the game suggests modern warfare might be simply ancient evil wearing new uniforms. The officers' reports detailing torture could be translated from Latin with little change. The soldiers' gradual descent into madness and violence mirrors the corruption described in the Romans' text. Even the gas weapons deployed in the opening echo the mysterious vapors that ancient cultists used to achieve their transformation. The character of Bufoy serves as bridge between these worlds. His poetry about whirling darkness could describe either shell shock or eldritch horror. His self-mutilation follows pattern found in both military trauma cases and ancient ritual practices. That he ends up wandering the Roman tunnels, blind but seeing better, suggests complete integration of modern and ancient forms of madness. The ancient arena's final confrontation makes this synthesis explicit. Here, where Roman cultists once sacrificed victims to forces beyond understanding, Henri must confront a horror born from modern warfare's cruel cruelties. The choice between destroying or escaping the beast becomes a choice between engaging with or fleeing from the knowledge that humanity's capacity for horror hasn't evolved, it's just found new expressions. The physical space of Amnesia the Bunker serves as more than mere setting. They are a manifestation of psychological, spiritual, and moral confinement. From the tight military corridors to the impossible geometries of the Roman ruins, every space is designed to evoke a suffocating sense of walls closing in, of options narrowing, of escape becoming increasingly impossible. The bunker's military architecture speaks to rigid hierarchy and control, even before supernatural elements emerge. Corridors force soldiers to move in prescribed paths. Checkpoints and locked doors regulate movement. The very air recycled through ventilation systems carries the stale taste of confinement. The physical constraint mirrors the psychological constraints of military discipline. Everyone trapped in their assigned roles, their prescribed behaviors. When the beast begins hunting, these confining spaces become actively hostile. The network of holes it creates through walls transforms the bunker's organized architecture into a maze, where danger could emerge from any direction. Yet Henri remains bound by human limitations, forced to use doors, crawl through vents, follow designated paths while his hunter moves freely through the very structure meant to protect him. The contrast between the beast's freedom of movement and Henri's confinement serves as dark commentary on how institutions meant to protect us can become our prisons. The generator room presents a particularly cruel form of confinement. As the heart of the bunker's power system, it demands constant attention, creating a tether that limits how far Henri can roam. Each expedition must be calculated against fuel reserves, turning the entire bunker into an elaborate cage with the generator as its timer. The darkness itself becomes a form of confinement, invisible walls created by the fear of what lurks beyond the light's reach. Most terrifying is how the spatial confinement reflects psychological states. The beast's victims are often found in increasingly tight spaces, crammed into lockers, stuffed into cruel spaces, wedged into corners. These positions mirror the mental state of the surviving soldiers as documented in their journals. Feeling increasingly concerned, cornered, options disappearing, minds turning in ever-tightening circles. The chapel, transformed into the beast's lair, represents the ultimate perversion of confined space. What should be a place of spiritual liberation becomes a charnel house where bodies are arranged in claustrophobic tableaus. The beast's careful positioning of corpses suggests an attempt to impose order through confinement, as if recreating the military discipline that partly shaped its transformation. The theme reaches its crescendo in the ancient arena. Despite being the game's largest space, it creates perhaps its most intense sense of confinement. The bridges over the void offer strictly limited paths. The darkness below promises a more absolute confinement than mere walls could provide. Even the air itself feels thick, resistant, as if the very atmosphere seeks to restrict movement. The game's endings offer no real escape from confinement. Even if he somehow evades capture, he remains confined by war itself, trapped in a conflict that has turned all of Europe into an elaborate prison. Henri's amnesia serves as more than mere narrative convenience. It becomes a powerful metaphor for the willful forgetting that enables both war's atrocities and personal betrayals. His gradual reconstruction of events through documents and environmental clues mirrors society's broader struggles to comprehend the incomprehensible horror of industrial warfare. The fragmented nature of Henri's memory recovery is particularly telling. He must piece together his guilt gradually, discovering his betrayal of Lambert not as a single revelation, but through accumulating evidence. This mechanical necessity, the player finding and reading scattered documents, becomes thematically significant. Like soldiers confronting their actions after battle, or nations facing their wartime conduct, the truth comes in pieces too small to reject but too devastating to fully absorb at once. The physical architecture of the bunker itself reflects this metaphorical dimension of memory. The administration room with its maps and reports represent official memory, the sanitized version of events. The soldiers' quarters with their personal letters and journals hold emotional memory. The prison section contains the memories that power would rather suppress. Each area Henri explores adds another layer to his understanding, just as war's truth emerges from multiple, often conflicting sources. Most significant is how Henri's amnesia forces him to experience his guilt twice. Once in the past, documented in his recovered journals, and again in the present as he pieces together what happened. This double burden of realization serves as powerful commentary on traumatic memory. His initial journal entries show his guilt building to the point of action, yet his amnesia forces him to rebuild this guilt from scratch, experiencing anew the horror of his responsibility. The game's treatment of physical evidence versus recovered memory creates its own psychological tension. Henri finds Lambert's transformation documented in official reports, personal testimonies, and physical evidence, but cannot remember his own role in setting these events in motion. This gap between objective fact and subjective experience mirrors the broader disconnect between war's official history and its lived horror. Even the beast's behavior complements this theme of troubled memory. It remembers Henri, recognizes him, holds some form of Lambert's consciousness, yet this recognition manifests as violence. This serves as dark metaphor for how trauma transforms memory. Recognition becomes threat, familiarity breeds horror. The beast's fixation on the rabbit toy suggests memory persists even when consciousness is destroyed, a particularly chilling implication for Henri's own fractured recollections. The physical spaces where Henri recovers his memory are themselves significant. His first journal entries are found in medical storage, clinical, sterile, detached. Later revelations come in increasingly intimate spaces. Personnel quarters, private offices, the chapel. This progression suggests memory itself as a journey from surface truth to deeper understanding, from official record to personal culpability. Perhaps most poignant is how Henri's amnesia affects his relationship with guilt and redemption. Without direct memory of his actions, his quest for redemption takes on an almost ritualistic quality. He must atone for sins he knows intellectually but cannot feel emotionally, creating a unique form of psychological horror. Every discovered document becomes both revelation and judgment, forcing him to continually reassess his own moral position. The game's save system interacts fascinatingly with this theme of memory and forgetting. The limited save points force players to remember their mistakes, to live with consequences rather than simply reloading. This mechanical choice reinforces the game's broader themes about memory's inescapability. Some things, once known, cannot be unknown. In the end, Henri's amnesia serves as perfect metaphor for humanity's broader struggles with historical memory. Like societies confronting past atrocities, he must piece together uncomfortable truths from fragments, facing both institutional attempts to obscure truth and personal reluctance to acknowledge guilt. His journey from ignorance to understanding parallels our own grappling with war's horror, gradual, painful, and ultimately transformative. In the end, perhaps Amnesia the Bunker's greatest horror lies not in its supernatural elements, but in how seamlessly they blend with the mundane cruelties of war. The beast that stalked Henri through darkened corridors was born not just from cursed water, but from the steady erosion of humanity that began long ago, before Lambert took that fatal drink. The ancient evil in the Roman tunnels found such fertile ground, precisely because modern warfare had already prepared the soil. Henri's journey through the bunker becomes a descent through layers of horror, each level revealing new depths of what humans can do, can become, and can accept. The generator's mechanical heartbeat marks time not just until darkness falls, but until another piece of humanity is sacrificed in the name of survival. Every bullet fired, every door sealed, every harsh choice made echoes both Lambert's transformation and the smaller transformations warfare demands of all its participants. The cruel irony is that Henri's original sin, a rigged game of dice, a moment of treating his friend as expendable, merely enacted in microcosm what the military system was already doing on a grand scale. His personal guilt becomes inseparable from the larger guilt of a world that can produce such efficient mechanisms for turning men into monsters, whether supernatural or merely bureaucratic. when Henri finally emerges from the bunker into that corpse-filled ditch. The approaching German voices remind us that all of this, the beast, the ancient evil, the psychological horror, exists within the larger context of a war that would kill millions. This suggests a terrifying question. Was the supernatural horror truly worse than what humans were already doing to each other? Or did it simply make visible what was already there? The game leaves us with an uncomfortable thought. Perhaps the real horror isn't that ancient evil or supernatural transformation exists. Perhaps it's that we create systems and structures that welcome such darkness, that make it feel at home. The beast may have been born from cursed water, but it was shaped by the very human horror that preceded it. And so we end where we began, in darkness, in confusion, in the space between human and monster. The generator's whine has fallen silent, the beast's roar has faded, but the question remains, echoing through time like footsteps in an empty bunker. When we look into the darkness, what looks back? And which should frighten us more? The ancient evil we discover there, or the modern evil we bring with us? Oh god, hope you enjoyed that one. Honestly, I never played any of the Amnesia games before this. Like, obviously when I was a kid, there was like PewDiePie and shit, and Jacksepticeye, whatever, they play the older Amnesia games. But I've seen like one video on this, maybe. I didn't actually watch it. It looked kind of cool though. But I thought I might as well try and diversify the content a little bit more. Staying still in the horror genre, you know, but because there's only so many old in the head, obscure indie horror games I can play before I run out. But yeah, I did hope that you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, as always. I didn't forget to do this time, but I would like to thank the members of the channel, which is Ice Bear, Arexano, and Ice Bear as well. 2 Ice Bears. I'll put the names on the screen, just so, in case I got the names wrong. Sorry if I mispronounced it, just let me know if I did. But yeah, if you also want to support the channel to get your name read out at the end, and to help decide future topics for videos, then do consider joining the channel or joining the Patreon. Either or none, I don't really mind. It just helps to support the channel a little bit more. But yeah, follow my Twitter if you want to see behind the scenes stuff if you want. And make sure to suggest down below what games you want me to cover next, because I am rapidly running out of games that I can cover. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm trying to, I don't know if you can tell, I'm trying to grind these videos out because I'm broke. I mean, because no, I'm joking. I just want to try and do this full time properly. So if I can, would be pretty cool. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, hopefully very soon. Bye-bye.